Good Sunday morning. Wish there were better news to tell you, but Congress and President Obama are still crawling to the finish line in the race to find a solution to America's fiscal crisis, with U.S. default possible this coming Thursday. The focus is now in the Senate. In session today, House Speaker John Boehner announced Saturday that talks between the House GOP and President Obama had broken down. So bottom line, there is no agreement on ending the shutdown of the government or raising the nation's debt limit. Joining me now, the Assistant Majority Leader of the Senate, Dick Durbin of Illinois, and Republican Senator Rob Portman of Ohio. Welcome both to Meet the Press. The leader of the Democrats, Harry Reid, the Majority Leader, Senator Durbin, said the following on Saturday, and let me share it with our audience.
I hope that our talking is some solace to the American people and to the world.
This is what should pass for progress in Congress, in Washington doing its job, that, you know, take solace in the fact that you're just talking?
It's a breakthrough. Hard to imagine, but it's a breakthrough. We've reached a point where the House Republicans and their leadership really have stepped to the sidelines. They're not part of this at this point. They can't agree among themselves about what they want to have done in this negotiation. The conversation that started yesterday between Senator McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, and Senator Reid, I think has the promise of finding a solution. I don't want to be overly optimistic, but there's a lot at stake. It isn't just the government shutdown. And that, of course, has laid off 800,000 federal employees and denied people basic services. It goes way beyond this, as we know. If in 4 days we default on our debt for the first time in our history, it is going to have a dramatic negative impact.
Senator Portman, you know, I want to get beyond talking points, want to get beyond just pure argument, because the American people simply want to know, why can't Congress do its job?
Well, first of all, Congress can't do its job unless Democrats are willing to talk. And the reason what Harry Reid just said was a breakthrough is that the president has refused to negotiate. I mean, it's unbelievable. This is the first time in history that a president of the United States has said, look, I'm not even going to talk about it. I served for two presidents, as you know, President Bush 1 and 2. Leon Panetta, who you're going to talk to later, has served as OMB director for another president. You always talk about it. Why? Because these votes are tough votes. The president should engage. You've got to deal with the underlying problem, which is the spending problem.
So is it both of your positions? I think this is an important moment of clarity. Do you both believe it's 100% the other side's fault?
Here's the point we've reached. We should have been in a budget conference 6 months ago to discuss these issues. We tried 21 times in the Senate to go to budget conference.
I understand. That's the question. Is it 100% the Republicans' fault that we're here?
I can tell you, if we had engaged in this negotiation in the budget conference and there was an impasse, then I'd say, well, there's fault on both sides. The Republicans in the Senate would not allow us to go to a budget conference to even debate these issues for 6 months.
That sounds like 100% in his view. Is it 100% the president and the Democrats' fault, Senator?
With all due respect, you know, for the last 3 years when the Senate Democrats refused to put a budget out, Democrats said we don't need a budget, we can still have these appropriations bills, which is why we're where we are. Dick's right, not having appropriations bills. David, I would say this. I would say the greatest act of bipartisanship over the last few decades has been Republicans and Democrats alike overpromising and overspending. And so, yeah, there's fault on both sides, and that's where we are. And that's why the president and the leaders of Congress ought to take this opportunity to deal with the underlying problem.
All right, so
to keep the budget caps in place that, my gosh, we just put them in place 2 years ago. We've added almost $2 trillion to the debt since then. And what I understand from last night's discussion is the Democrats are now saying we want to bust those caps. But second, on the debt limit, we need to be sure that we're dealing with the underlying problem, which is a almost $17 trillion national debt.
Okay, this gets...
And the president says he wants to do that, so let's work together to do it.
We know it gets confusing fast, so I want to ask each of you, sort of a bottom line question is, do we have an agreement on raising the debt ceiling and ending the government shutdown by Thursday? And if the answer is yes, Senator Durbin, what do you have to overcome? What are the real sticking points now that have to be overcome?
You're asking us if we have such an agreement?
Do you think you'll have it by Thursday? And if so, that means you will overcome what sticking points that you have right now?
I'm a hopeful person, and I believe we can do it. I hope sensible people prevail, because at this point it isn't just a shutdown and all of the damage that's caused, but if we default on our debt, it will have a dramatic negative impact on the savings account and retirement account.
Understood. So what are the sticking points? That's really what I'm trying to get
to. Whether or not we will sit down at a budget conference finally and start hammering them out, what will be the spending level for this fiscal year that
the rest of the year,
whether there will be a sequester cut come the first 15 days of the new year, the new calendar year. Those are the basic elements that I think we need to work on.
Does the discussion about...
I'm a yes, by the way.
A yes, the deal by Thursday?
Yes.
Because you will have overcome what obstacle?
Well, because we will have decided as a Congress that we need to avoid going over the debt limit. We'll figure it out, and it'll probably be a relatively short-term solution.
But you know the House leadership, you know a lot of House Republicans in particular.
Yeah.
They seem like they're quite unhappy here. They don't want to do a long-term extension, raising of the debt ceiling. They want to still have a conversation about Obamacare. In your estimation, should the discussion about Obamacare be over?
Well, first of all, I oppose Obamacare. I think we ought to repeal it and replace it, and I think most Americans agree with that. But we can minimize the damage in this process by doing certain things that were consistent with the original Obamacare, like making people verify their income when they go on the exchanges, or dealing with the 40-hour work week so that more people aren't taken into 30 hours or below part-time work. But no, I think we ought to focus on these spending issues, and we can and should. I'm not suggesting there'll be a solution to all these long-term problems in the next 2 days, but I do think that we'll figure out a way to put off this, to have the discussion, and I'm hopeful we'll do that actually in the next couple days.
But my question then gets, so if you get past a crisis point and say, oh, I know, well, let's get into a bigger discussion about the budget. You were on the Simpson-Bowles, that commission. You were on the super committee. Both of those went nowhere.
Wasn't so super.
Wasn't so super, right. So we still have a problem, which is the Democrats want more revenue. Republicans want to deal with the, in the entitlements, which are, really cannibalizing the budget. Where is there a reason to be hopeful that Congress can get to something meaningful?
David,
here?
this may be heresy, but I think Simpson-Bowles got it right. Put everything on the table. We know that come 10 years from now, Medicare is not sustainable financially. We've got to do something. Why wait 10 years to see that reality? We know that Social Security has 20 years, or perhaps less. What are we going to do about it today in a small way that will give it this longevity? And I have to say to the Republican side, for goodness sakes, we have a tax code that takes $1.3 trillion out of the economy each year, out of the Treasury, I should say, each year. And in that, we cannot find some savings, closing some loopholes, quote, raising revenue? Well, of course we can.
Senator Portman, you referenced, I'll let you answer just a second. Let me just raise this issue about Obamacare because I want to come back to that. One of the issues is that for conservatives, this has been such a huge issue. Even though the law has been passed and upheld by the court, they still argue, no, there's a basis to really try to make it better, to replace it, to get rid of it. And then you had Dr. Ben Carson, who won this straw poll at the Values Voters Summit here in Washington. This is what he said on Friday. I want to get your response.
I have to tell you, Obamacare is really, I think, the worst thing that has happened in this nation since slavery. And it is, in a way, it is slavery, in a way.
He was second in the straw poll. How much damage does that do to your position that Obamacare should be repealed? Is that overstatement that's counterproductive?
Well, I mean, he's a doctor who feels passionately about this issue, obviously. He can speak for himself, but let me just go back to what Dick said.
Well, but is that something that as a senior Republican you think is helpful to the debate about Obamacare?
Well, I think what would be helpful is if we sat down and figured out how to make this less damaging to American families and to our American economy, because it is a huge problem. By the way, it's not just a glitch in terms of the rollout, it's a breakdown. Having tried myself to get on yesterday, I feel sorry for the New York Times researcher I heard about this morning who spent 11 days trying to get on and end up with a blank screen. So, I mean, there are huge problems with it. Let's be honest, and we ought to be sure that we can minimize the damage.
Should Secretary Sebelius keep her job, both of you? Do you think?
Absolutely.
No question about it.
Understand, we've been off to a rocky start for sure, because 15 million people wanted to get on. Because why? Because 40 or 50 million Americans don't have any insurance. This is their first chance, many of them, to ever have health insurance. They're desperate for an affordable health insurance policy. And we haven't had much help when it comes to funding the startup of Obamacare.
Senator Roberts, your colleague in the Senate, Republican, said that Secretary Sebelius, head of Health and Human Services, should resign.
Yeah, look, I don't think that's going to solve the problem, unfortunately. I think it's much deeper than that. I think the law is fundamentally flawed. I also think this rollout has been a disaster, not just a glitch. But let me go back to something Dick said, because I want to say something positive here about my colleague. Give him some time. Give him some time. He has been willing, and he's shown political courage to do so, to talk about these issues. And I think this morning, if we can leave with anything, it is that this is an opportunity over the next couple days, but really over the next couple months, because I think we'll probably push this down the road a little bit, to deal with the underlying problem. And that is the fact that we have these historic levels of debt and deficit that are hurting the economy today. It's like a wet blanket on the economy today. That's why we're not, in my view, getting the kind of robust recovery we all hope for. But it is immoral to do to future generations. And we keep building up this debt and deficit. And Dick's exactly right. We've got to deal with the part of the budget that's not being talked about, which is 2/3 of the budget and the fastest growing part. And if we don't do that, we will have failed. If we do that, we'll surprise the American people and do the right thing.